So let me please introduce our next speaker, Professor Volker Auwärter. He holds a PhD in chemistry and has been active in the field of forensic toxicology since 2000. He's head of the Forensic Toxicology Department of the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Freiburg, Germany. Besides being an expert witness and reading for medical students, he has been coordinating several EU-funded projects. His research focuses on cannabinoids, both natural and synthetic, and also covers other new drugs, post-mortem toxicology, drug metabolism, and pharmacokinetic studies. His work has been included in over 150 scientific publications and international peer-reviewed journals. He was awarded with the TIAFT Achievement Award in 2013 and received several national awards for his contribution to forensic toxicology. Professor Auwärter will be talking today about NPS in prisons in Germany. We really look forward to your presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Aisha, for the introduction. Yes, I will talk about NPS in prisons, a special surrounding for drug use, and of course known since long that in most prisons, I guess worldwide, there are some problems with drug use. We started to become aware of this problem around 2014, 2015, when we received the first urine samples from prisoners, which were intoxicated and really had severe health problems after the use of these drugs. And then, we knew about this problem from this time on. And since then, it did not really disappear, and it remained a major problem in prisons. So that time we did not know much about NPS use in prisons, but we had these positive samples. And over time, I will shortly show you some data. The number of samples we received from prisons went up, and there was always quite a high proportion of positive findings in these samples. Mostly we found synthetic cannabinoids or their breakdown products in urine. Other drugs like opioids or designer stimulants, so other classes of NPS, were only detected very rarely. So synthetic cannabinoids are the main class of substances found in this population. We also had some death cases around 2015, 16 in German prisons and also in other European countries, which made the problem a bit more aware in these circles. So from that on, we also had higher numbers of samples we analyzed. There's no real good epidemiological data on NPS consumption in prisons in general, but I can just show you the data from the years 2015 to 2018 here. You see the number of samples we received from prisons, and you see the positive rate. That means in the beginning, 60% of the samples we received from prisons were positive for synthetic cannabinoids, which is a huge number. Usually positive rates are around, a few percent maybe, or 10 or 20%. Of course, it depends on the sampling strategy. If we receive samples with a clear suspicion of drug use, then positivity rate is higher, of course. And if it is a general drug screening, then the positive rates will go down, of course. But you see in the beginning really high rates because many of the prisoners were intoxicated and they needed to know what happened to them. So 2016, 17, 18, you see the numbers went up to almost around 1,000 in the maximum samples per year. Positivity rates went down a little bit. This is probably an effect of, different sample strategy. They became aware of this problem and then they began to test in a wider population for the use of these drugs. But still, these positive rates are very high. If you compare, for example, to positive rates in forensic psychiatry, then here we find between 10 and 20% positive rate, which is still high, but not as high as in prisons. Okay, so we saw the maximum sample numbers was 2017. High positive rates for synthetic cannabinoids, although that does not really tell us about prevalence, of course. We had some hotspots in southern Germany, particularly in Bavaria. So there are regional differences. We already knew that since years. And in most prisons, there were no specific prevention measures regarding NPS use in prisons. What some prisons did was that they changed their drug control strategies because, of course, for example, dogs can't smell these NPS drugs. They are trained for cannabis or cocaine or other drugs, classical drugs, but are not able to detect these new drugs. So this was the starting point for an EU-funded project we started in 2017. And partners were among the groups of Heino and Bernd, and another institution from Germany, and two institutions, one from Poland and one from Hungary. And the aim of this project was to systematically assess NPS consumption in prisons of the three countries involved. And we wanted to do this by urine analysis, interviews of prison staff, and interview of prisoners in so-called focus groups. Then we wanted to develop strategies for the reduction of NPS consumption and the related harms by providing trainings for prisoners and again for staff. Then we wanted to evaluate these prevention measures. Are they really working or not? And finally, we had a conference to share kind of best practice model for dealing with these drugs in prisons. And how was the study designed? Well, one main point, of course, were the urine samples, because they should give us an impression of prevalence, because in the study, we did not choose only prisoners who were suspicious of drug use, but it was more like a random sampling. So it could really give us an impression of the prevalence of the use of these drugs. Then we had the interviews, usually two prison staff members, telephone or face by face. Of course, we had a lot of problems because of the pandemic, and we could not really perform as we initially had planned the project, but still we got some results. Then in a second step, we had the trainings were given to the staff and to the prisoners. The focus group interviews were performed, and finally we had a second urine sampling. And the idea was to see if prevalence went down after the intervention and the training. That was, of course, our intention, which was not really working, because in many prisons we were not able to perform the second phase of urine sampling due to the pandemic. But we still had questionnaires and the evaluation of the trainings. Regarding the urine sampling, we had a double strategy. So first we screened all the urine samples for classic drugs, and these results were reported to the prisons because it is a part of the routine drug screening they already performed before. And for the study, we just additionally analyzed these urine samples for NPS of the different classes, and the reports were then only reported to the prisons after anonymization to avoid negative consequences for the prisoners, just made up from our projects. That was an ethical issues we had to address. But still we had the numbers of positive findings. Here are a few examples of prisons, one in Rheinland-Pfalz, that is one federal state of Germany in the southwest. And in phase one, this was, actually we started in 2018, end of 2018. And the first phase here was then in the beginning of 2019. We had more than 100 samples. And as you see here, 16 individuals were positive for, in this time, 2 different synthetic cannabinoids, well, which is a quite high positive rate for a random sample. We have to say that because, of course, you saw before we had higher positive rates in prisons, but these were samples with a suspicion of drug use. And here, this was not the case. And secondly, you see we had only 7 individuals who consumed other drugs, including, of course, medications like benzodiazepines, sometimes also methadone, not in this prison, but you see they make up only 7% as compared to 16% who were positive for synthetic cannabinoids, which points towards the idea that in some prisons, at least, synthetic cannabinoids have really taken over, so to say, and other drugs are not very relevant anymore. After the intervention, we did a second sampling, again, around 100 samples. And that time we still had 11 positive findings, but less than in the first round. So that might be a positive effect of the intervention and the trainings. And again, 6 individuals with other drugs, that is quite the same as in the first round. So, but that gives an impression that in some prisons, we really have high prevalences, because 16% is a high number. Sorry, did somebody have a question? No, okay. Here's just a graphical presentation of the results. And here's a second sample. That's from Bremen, Heino's home town. And here we had a sample of 147 samples. And the positive rate is higher of 29% who were positive for synthetic cannabinoids. Somebody didn't turn off.
Sorry, I unmuted. Yeah, I muted them. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. And that was really surprising. Other drugs here, 47 individuals. That means more than 30% were positive with, again, you see a lot of also substitution drugs which were shared among the people, because these are prisoners who were not substituted with methadone or buprenorphine, but they were still positive. So prisoners exchanged these drugs somehow in prison here. Also ketamine in one time, and 8 were diluted. So they sort of cheated during the urine sampling and just filled water or apple juice or something into the tube. That, of course, sometimes happens, but we can analytically detect that. So here, again, very high positive rate. And unfortunately, we were not able to do the second phase here. That would have been very interesting in this case. And finally, a third example of a prison where we did not find any NPS and only a small number. Well, here it's about 10% because we had only 30 samples here, which had methamphetamine or amphetamine. And in the second phase, it was quite similar. So you see, it is quite different if you look at different regions. And this really reflects what is going on outside the prisons, because in Thüringen, which is in the eastern part of Germany, methamphetamine is quite an issue, and it is in prisons too, which is not really a surprise, but could be shown in this sample. So what can we conclude about the urine screenings? We only had 7 prisons here in our study now due to the pandemic, but in 5 of these prisons we found synthetic cannabinoids, and only 2 were completely negative. We had a decline in positive rate in Rheinland-Pfalz after the intervention, so that could have been an effect of our intervention, although that we can't prove that, of course. We see the same dynamic of the market inside as outside of the prison regarding the specific substances we detected, which is also not really a surprise because they have to come into the prison from outside, of course. What is also known is that LC-MS as an analytical technique is the gold standard if you want to detect synthetic cannabinoid breakdown products in urine, and immunochemical methods are not appropriate and do not really work. So that is also an important message that these quick tests are not able to detect these drugs. Another question was, how do these drugs reach the prisons? And from the interviews, we got some impressions here. And of course, visitors can bring in the drugs. There are day release prisoners who practice body packing. That is another issue that is also known for classical drugs. Throwing over the prison wall happens, sometimes even with drones. Then the prison staff can be involved in drug trafficking in prison, of course. But a main issue regarding synthetic cannabinoids is correspondence letters and paintings, which are impregnated with these drugs and then are distributed among the prisoners. And actually that looks, for example, like this. You see a sheet of paper that came out of a prison. And if we analyze that, we find yes, around a little bit less than 0.5 milligram per square centimeter of this paper. And that means if we look at the potency of these drugs, that we have around 1 dose of this drug on a square centimeter. And that's how it is consumed. A little piece of this paper is just rolled into a cigarette and then it is smoked. So that has really become the main entrance into prisons. It is smuggled via impregnated paper. Yes, and of course, a normal piece of paper then contains about 600 single doses of these drugs, which is quite a number, of course, quite a business for the people who are involved. So how does trafficking in prisons work? Of course, it is quite similar as trafficking works in general, also with classic drugs. Usually small conspirational circles, 3 or even less people involved. All people benefit somehow, some only financially, some also by having other privileges. And of course, they have to trust each other. And it's not uncommon that somebody, talks, and then, of course, the people are punished for that. Often, they are hidden away in common rooms, for example, in kitchens, at the workplace, or in sanitary facilities. Delivery takes place, at locations where there are no cameras, of course, because otherwise people get caught easily. And sometimes it happens also that people swing the drugs from one window to the next, just with a little rope or something. That is very common also for other drugs, of course. What did we come to know about drug consumption in general? It is really perceived by most of the prisoners that drugs really play a major role in prison. Mostly because, life in prison is quite boring, and it seems like drug use is, sometimes the only way to get out of this boredom. In many prisons, NPS have taken over the first place. Still, cannabis and amphetamines and medications and also heroin are available to a certain extent, but have become less important in the last years and with the rise of the NPS phenomenon. Usually the drugs are smoked, sometimes ingested as tea, which is not advisable because, people need higher doses because most of these drugs have high first pass effects. Yes, also some prisoners said that drug consumption helps them to feel more normal in a way. Mostly NPS are used alone in the cell, but also sometimes in groups during exercise or during the work hours. So that depends. well, how did the phenomenon develop over the last years? So as I said, in 2015-16, there were a lot of intoxication cases in some prisons. They needed emergency doctors several times a day. And that was also the time when there were some lethal overdoses in prisons. So, but since then, the problem has calmed down a little bit. So we still have prevalence, but it's intoxications and severe intoxications are not as often as they used to be. The distribution via paper and letters has become very common. That's the main entrance way. But generally, as I said, we have a downward trend regarding overdoses since 2018. And in 2019-20, there were only low numbers of severe overdoses. And that might be an effect of, well, changed composition. In the beginning, sometimes even the papers were more or less overdosed. So if you only took a little piece of paper, that was already a high dose. So now papers all mostly contain lower doses per unit, and that makes, well, overdosing less likely. Also, many prisoners have some experience now, and they are more cautious if they use these drugs because they know if they take too much, it can become really serious. So that's also another point. And yeah, they also know that it's really like, well, very risky to use these drugs because you never really know the effects because the composition and the kind of compounds really changes over time. But we also saw that in one of the prisons, they had over the last years, not even one NPS intoxications, at least that was noticed. So there might have been one, but then it was not noticed. That is, of course, a possibility. But like I said, there are big regional differences, at least in Germany, we can say that. In some prisons, really a big problem, and in others, there seems to be almost no problem. So what are the motives for NPS consumption in prisons? Well, one point, of course, is the availability. It's easy to smuggle in, and there is a high availability. So that makes people to, well, at least try it out. Then another point, of course, is drug tests are performed in German prisons quite often. And these drugs are not detected by the standard tests. So many of the users go undetected as long as the prison administration does not really ask for a deeper analysis that comprises NPS. Many say they use these drugs because of private problems or boredom or circulating thoughts. So that really pushes prisoners towards the use of these drugs. And on the other side, what prevents them from using these drugs is the fear of punishment. So if drug tests are expanded to NPS, then this motivation of non-detectability, of course, disappears. They also fear the loss of privileges if they get caught with the consumption. And that is something we can really work with. They fear the health risks if they are aware of that. So it's very important to communicate these risks, which are much higher, at least for the synthetic cannabinoids, when compared to cannabis, which actually is substituted by these drugs. So what are potential measures that could be taken in prisons? Of course, information is very important. So flyers or information sheets can be provided, although that is not always very effective, as we know. Drug counseling is very important. So there should be people who can really give basic informations and also counsel people if they have problems with the use of these drugs or other drugs. Of course, we can do something against the boredom in prison. So sport opportunities, music, newspapers, handicrafts, and so on could prevent people from using drugs. Then social competence training is something that can be done. Substitution for people who are really addicted to drug use, maybe even before they started their sentence. Self-aid groups can help. Therapy preparation courses to prepare people for a therapy they might start when they go out of prison. And informational events, just like the trainings we gave within our project. Okay, what can we tell from the interviews? It was interesting that the availability of NPS is experienced as high, and that was the case both if we asked prison staff or the prisoners. They both agreed on that. Then boredom seems to be a main role. So also other things, of course, but that could be quite a point to prevent this boredom by offering some leisure opportunities or more leisure opportunities. Another point was the detectability of these drugs. So if you don't really test for these drugs, that is, of course, a big motivation for people to use it because they will not get caught and will not have the consequences of the drug use. So that's really an important point. And it has to be communicated that the risks of these drugs are much higher than the risks of, well, the drugs that are substituted, especially if we talk about cannabis on the one hand and synthetic cannabinoids on the other hand. But that has to be properly communicated. So it has to be, well, they really have to believe it. If it is just like, oh, don't use this because it's really like hell, you really have to demonstrate them that they can believe it and not, well, feel like you just tell them a story to, well, make them refrain from using these drugs. Also interesting, many or the majority of the users in prison would not use these drugs outside of prisons because then they will have access to cannabis, for example. So, and even many of the prisoners just started to use NPS in prison. They did not use it before. So that was really an interesting point. Also from a healthcare perspective, because synthetic cannabinoids tend to provoke addiction much quicker than cannabis does. And both prisoners and prison staff would appreciate more information on NPS because it is still not very easy to get good information on these drugs and their risks. So, and an extended dialogue would be helpful. Of course, that's difficulty because if you speak openly about this issue, at least for the prisoners, that might involve some risks of negative consequences. So that has to be, of course, in an open atmosphere where they really can talk about the problems. For example, within a drug counseling service, which is, of course, not telling the prison administration about, well, the issues they were talking about. Yeah, that's it so far. I think there's still time for a few questions. If there are any, I would be happy to try to answer them.
A great presentation. Thank you so much. I was just thinking about whether we do really have time, only a minute left. But perhaps just a very quick question from someone. And I think I would suggest that we move the most of the discussion towards the end of all the presentations. Okay, perhaps if you just stay with us, we have 2 more presentations, and at the end we'll have a bit more time for general discussions. But thank you so much for this really interesting presentations, and I also have noted several questions of my own. I see a comment from Heino in the chat. That's a response to a question. Okay, Hannah from China says it's a very impressive study. I have noticed that methamphetamine didn't belong to NPS. Was I right, and why? Heino briefly replied that it doesn't belong to NPS. Volker, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, that's true. Of course, methamphetamine is a drug we know for long. But that was just a finding on the other side. As I said in the study, we looked for both, for classical drugs and for NPSs, and well, that was a finding of, well, a classical finding, I could say, which was in Thüringen in that case, where methamphetamine is quite prevalent since a few years. It's not very prevalent in other federal states, though. Yes, so that's correct. It's not an NPS and was not counted as an NPS finding.
Okay, so we have then decided to put the rest of the questions towards the end. Thank you again very much.
It's fine. I will be there till the end of
That's great.
the discussion. Okay, thank you.